Take Back Your Health Now, Episode 106.
You're listening to the Take Back Your Health Now podcast, the show that interviews the top doctors, athletes, trainers, and entrepreneurs to help you find the holy grail of health. Now here's your host, Dr. Dan Margolin.
Hi, this is Dr. Dan Margolin with another segment of Take Back Your Health Now, where we pull out all the stops in search of health's holy grail. We are so excited. Today we have Dr. Stephen Gundry. He is a renowned cardiologist and heart surgeon. He is the director of the International Heart and Lung Institute in Palm Springs, California, and the founder director of the Center for Restorative Medicine in Palm Springs and Santa Barbara. But he is destined to be known by everyday people outside his field as the author of the life-changing book, The Plant Paradox: The Hidden Dangers in Healthy Foods That Cause Disease and Weight Gain. Dr. Gundry reveals that gluten is just one variety of a common and highly toxic plant-based protein called lectin. Lectins are found not only in grains like wheat, but also in the gluten-free foods most of us commonly regard as healthy, including many fruits, vegetables, nuts, beans, and conventional dairy products. Dr. Gundry, welcome to the show, sir.
Hey, thanks for having me back, Dan.
We're so excited, sir. You know, I have to say, your segment was the number one rated segment we have ever had in terms of downloads, in terms of watches. And I thought about it. You know, I read your book, the first book, and I thought about it. And I think, from my perspective, you know, I've interviewed a lot of people about dieting and paleo diets and all that. But what your book did is it actually took an understanding of the evolution of people and why they evolved into the diets that they have and why some of them are bad. It actually broke it down and it explained it. And I wanted to ask you, how did you, I know you met Big Ed, and we talked about that last time about how he was sort of the catalyst for your researching this, but it didn't explain to me too, that how did you break it down from an evolutionary standpoint? I just thought that was so fascinating.
That's a great question. Actually, I had this opportunity at Yale University back when I was an undergraduate in the dark age, where we could do we could design our own major, and you had to have a thesis and you had to defend it. And my thesis was that you could take a great ape, manipulate its food supply and manipulate its environment, and prove that you would arrive at a human. And I actually defended my thesis and got an honors, and then I gave it to my parents for safekeeping. And so that was actually my research for 4 years at Yale. And when I met Big Ed and listened to how he had constructed his diet to reverse his coronary disease, this light bulb went off. And I said, wait a minute, you know, this is something I researched years ago, and it was actually my thesis. And luckily, my parents still had my thesis, all 178 pages of it.
Wow.
And so I said, would you mind, sending it up to me? And so the rest is history. I put myself on my thesis and lost 70 pounds, and then started using that to treat my patients. And lo and behold, those evolutionary principles hold in the modern era. So that's how it happened.
Amazing. And you know, the book, the way you write it is almost like speaking to you, right? I mean, I've read a lot of other books where you almost need to have a dictionary with you to clear the words, but that's not how you came across. So how did you develop that style? What made you actually approach it in that style?
Well, it's interesting. Even as a heart surgeon and cardiologist, I became known as someone who could take a very complex topic or even a complex operation and make it so that really anybody, regardless of their skill level, could follow it. So I was lucky enough. My father was head of sales training at Mutual of Omaha Insurance Company, and I guess his ability to teach rubbed off on me. And so, yeah, I've always been able to break things down. And if you like the first book, The Plant Paradox, is even more in that, if you will, chatty style. I really wanted both books to be like I'm sitting, next to you in my office, explaining how this all works. And luckily, my editor at HarperCollins really didn't touch my style. So I appreciate that, and people do feel like I'm sitting there chatting with them.
No, absolutely, absolutely. Well, so the first book, The Gundry Diet Evolution, really goes into that there's almost like a second genetic basis, if you would, to a human, which is foreign. In other words, it's bacteria and things that you wouldn't suspect would even make you hungry, right? Like that if you grow up eating sugar, you develop these kind of sugar bacteria, and that to switch them, and they actually release hormones or whatever they release that makes you feel hungry when it's not you, it's actually this foreign invader, if you would, in your stomach. How does that evolve, and how does that differ from your book, The Plant Paradox?
Well, the first book was more about how information that we send our own genes impact what's going to happen to you. And as things evolved in my knowledge and in the knowledge of the human microbiome, it became very evident to me and others that if you wanted to count genes that occupy us, then 99% of all the genetic material that makes us are actually non-human genes. They're bacterial genes, they're viral genes, etc. And if we wanted to do a body count, about 90% of all the cells that are in us are non-human cells. And the interesting thing about the bacterial genome and the viral genome is that we know that bacteria are capable of changing extremely rapidly. Same with viruses, they mutate incredibly rapidly. So one of the interesting concepts is that because these bacteria and viruses are so much more prevalent and have so much more ability to change on a dime, that I think we've uploaded much of our information processing to the cloud, if you will, and that cloud is our microbiome. And if you look at it that way, then it's very efficient for us to receive information from our bacteria and our viral and our fungal genome to our immune system and to our brain. And the more you do a deep dive into this, the scarier in a way it becomes, because we are more a product of what's going on with our microbiome than most people actually feel comfortable with. And we know that the microbiome is responsible now for the production of most of the serotonin that we make, the feel-good hormone. And we know that the microbiome now is capable, if you will, of text messaging our brain. This was actually discovered way back in the 1930s in a very obscure paper that they had a bunch of inmates in a sanitarium for severe depression. That's what happened to people back then. And they gave these people a bunch of enemas, and then they took feces, bowel movements from happy people, and they gave them fecal enemas from happy people, and the depressed people got happy. And
Wow.
Yeah, it sounds crazy, but we now know from both rat experiments and human experiments that we can take, for instance, feces from obese individuals and feed it to skinny rats. Rats love to eat poop, by the way. And the skinny rats will become fat, all because their microbiome became different. This has been written about in a human subject in the Lancet, a British journal. Fascinating story of a woman marathon runner who was thin, who got the horrible colonic infection C. difficile that most people have heard about. And
Sure.
the modern treatment for this is a fecal transplant. And you try to get a fecal transplant from a relative because, believe it or not, we share lots of the microbiome with our relatives and next of kin. And so one of her best matches was a niece who happened to be about 30 pounds overweight, otherwise very healthy. And the fecal transplant worked. She was cured of C. difficile. But over the next year, despite returning to her running, she actually gained 30 pounds.
Wow.
Yeah. And so...
And she gained the exact amount of weight.
Yeah, the exact amount of weight that her niece was carrying. And so we now know that the microbiome, and I talk about this in the plant paradox, actually acts very much like Audrey, the blood-sucking plant in the Broadway show and movie.
Right.
Little shop of horrors.
Yes.
You know, feed me, Seymour, feed me. And so we know that bacteria can actually request you to eat the foods that they want and that they are capable of controlling your behavior. And it really is scary when we think about it that, these little one-cell organisms could control this huge creature and manipulate its behavior. But I was turned on to this years ago by a very famous author and researcher at Stanford by the name of Robert Sapolsky. And I credit him a lot in my first book. But just to titillate your audience, we know that there's a one-celled organism called toxoplasmosis that most women have heard about because pregnant women are told to avoid cats. Because
right,
and because cats are carriers of toxoplasmosis, and just to regale you for a minute, the toxoplasmosis, like many parasites, has to have an intermediate host to get to where it wants to be, and the toxoplasmosis wants to be in the brain of a cat, and to get there, its life cycle. It goes through a rat, an intermediate host, to get to the cat. Now, you'd think that was a really dumb choice because rats obviously are afraid of cats and hate them. And in fact, the smell of cat urine will make a rat run the other direction. So what happens is toxoplasmosis, the rat drinks the toxoplasmosis egg in infected water, and the larva stage goes to the rat's brain and literally rewires it so that it, number one, loves the smell of cat urine. And number two, if it sees a cat, it runs towards the cat. And that's actually how it gets into the cat. Now,
that is crazy, Dr. So it totally rewires this rat so that it basically kills itself.
Yeah, it runs to danger. And Robert Sapolsky gives a beautiful 1-hour lecture on YouTube about this. And the U.S. military got interested in toxoplasmosis because we know that about 50% of all motorcycle deaths, the brain is infected with toxoplasmosis in these poor guys. And so toxoplasmosis actually makes you run towards danger and seek out danger. And the U.S. military got interested in it with the idea of infecting troops so that they would run towards danger, which sounds like a clever idea.
Right.
And so the idea that these little single-cell organisms could affect our behavior is now well proven. And so the idea that some single-cell organisms could kind of take over our gut and our behavior to give them the foods that they want, which in turn makes us fat, is not science fiction. It's real. And the good news is, and part of the plant paradox is, you can actually control what type of bugs that you have in your gut by the food you eat. And you can actually run the gang members out of town by depriving them of foods that they need to survive, and instead feeding the good bugs that actually make you skinny. And it's all in the Plant Paradox, and I think it's kind of a fascinating read. Like one of
That's good. I have to say, just learning. I mean, I did not know this until we spoke on our last time, and it changed my viewpoint, because prior to that, if I gained weight, I felt very guilty. Right? I said, "Oh my God, I'm weak. I'm this and that."
Yep.
The minute you know that it's like somebody else or some other entity, you can actually take responsibility for it. It's actually quite empowering, because then you can just go, okay, great. So this thing in my gut is hungry. I'm not feeding it. I'm actually going to go the other way. And it's not a weakness in me. It's actually an external force. Is that the reaction you find that people have?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just tell you a story. My last two patients of the day were a truck driver and his wife. They're long haul truckers, and they literally live in their truck. And this gentleman, unbeknownst to me, about a year ago, was given the 2-page kind of handout, which we used to call the Matrix. It's now the Plant Paradox. And the one page says, "Don't eat this stuff," and the other page says, "Eat this stuff." And I walk into the room, and he says, can I give you a big hug? And, I don't even know the guy. And I said, "Yeah, sure." He says, "You saved my life." I said, "Well, what are you talking about?" And he said, "Well, here's a picture of me a year ago." And the gentleman has lost 100 pounds. And his wife has lost over 100 pounds. And they're truckers. They don't exercise. And he says, "All we did was follow this list, and we didn't eat the foods you told us not to eat." And, it's that sort of thing. It's that simple. Just stay away from certain foods. And like I talk about in the Plant Paradox, the rule number one is that it's not what I tell you to eat that's important. It's what I tell you not to eat that's important. And if you don't eat certain healthy things like grains and beans and the nightshade family, for instance, like potatoes, eggplant, tomatoes, peppers, you will basically starve the bad guys out of your gut and empower the good guys. And like I say, his wife and he do not exercise. They're long haul truckers. And they, it's hilarious listening to them tell the story of how, they'll, whatever town they're in, they'll detach their semi from their trailer and go to a Sprouts or to a Whole Foods or a health food store, and they go cross country into Canada. And they said, this was actually really easy. Once we had the list, we knew exactly what to eat and what not to eat, and here we are. And I want to give you a big hug.
Change their lives.
Yeah.
Wow. You said something. You said eggplant. I've always been taught that eggplant is like the healthiest thing that you could ever have. You're saying it's not healthy?
No, it's really one of the biggest toxins there is. See, again, from an evolutionary standpoint, we've been exposed to certain foods throughout our evolution, and we can argue about how long humans have been evolving, but let's take 2 to 4 million years. If you want to make it 150,000 years, that's fine. But none of us ate a grain or a bean until 10,000 years ago when agriculture got started. But what's equally as important is that all of us in the world, including America, are not from America. We're from Europe, Asia, or Africa. And that means that none of us were exposed to an American plant and the lectins that they contain until 500 years ago when Columbian trade started. And so eggplant is a part of the nightshade family, which is a American plant. And the peels and the seeds of the nightshades, same with tomatoes, same with peppers, and same with potatoes, are very, very, very foreign to us. And they are an inflammatory compound. And as we talk about in the plant paradox, when you eat inflammatory compounds, one of our reactions is to store fat for our immune system. And that fat is generally stored where the attack is being made, and that's actually down in our gut. Most people don't know that about 65% of our immune system, our white blood cells, are clustered around the lining of our gut. And
I didn't know that. Dr. Gundry, what is a lectin? You mentioned lectin. What is that?
Yeah,
These plants have lectins?
Yeah. So all plants have lectins, and lectins are the plant defense system. And one of the hard things to get people to realize is that plants do not want to be eaten. They actually have a life. They are subject to evolutionary pressures, just like animals. And a plant that can grow and have its babies survive wins compared to a plant that gets eaten or has its babies eaten. So the problem for plants is that when animals arrive, plants could not run, they couldn't hide, they couldn't fight, but they had the ability to wage chemical warfare. They're chemists of incredible ability. So one of the ways they do this is to make a protein that are called lectins. And lectins are what are called sticky proteins, and they like to bind to specific sugar molecules. And I go into this in great depth in the plant paradox. And the idea of these proteins is to make your gut leaky, or to bind to the linings of your joints. They actually bind to the linings of your blood vessels, and there's very good evidence that they bind to nerve cells in your brain. There's very good evidence that lectins are one of the major causes of Parkinson's, oh, by the way. And
wow.
Yeah.
So the plants are defending them, so they can't run.
Yeah.
So they've developed a defense mechanism that says, if you eat me, I'm going to make you sick.
That's exactly right. And the smart animal says, every time I eat this plant or these plant babies, I'm not feeling very good, and I think I'll go eat something else. The plant wins, the animal wins, and everybody's happy. And then, of course, humans arrived, and as most of us know, we're pretty doggone stupid. So when we eat these things, for instance, we know that the lectins in corn, the lectins in tomatoes, the lectins in grains are the cause of heartburn. And so when we get heartburn, we don't say, gee, this plant's trying to get my attention. This corn chip is trying to get my attention. I'll just take a Prilosec or a Nexium and swallow some Tums, and I'll be fine. Without realizing that, the plant is going, hey, you dummy, I'm trying to point out to you that you shouldn't be eating me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is there a way of getting these lectins out of these plants? Is there actually a way to detoxify them to some degree?
Question. So, interestingly enough, lectins are not in general heat sensitive. You can't just cook them. In fact, if you look at your slow crock pot, your slow cooker, there will be a warning label either in the instruction book or actually stuck onto it saying, warning, do not cook beans in this crock pot because the temperature never gets high enough to kill off the lectins. But here's the good news. A pressure cooker will destroy all lectins except gluten. So you can pressure cook your beans, you can pressure cook your eggplant, you can pressure cook your tomatoes, your rice, and you'll destroy the lectins. And, the modern pressure cooker, like I talk about in the plant paradox, is not your grandmother's pressure cooker that blew up all over the ceiling. It looks and acts just like a modern day rice cooker. It's a one-touch thing. Right now, Amazon and Walmart had a sale for Cyber Monday. I suspect it's still on, that the Instapot, which is a great device, was on sale for like $59. So run out and get it. A pressure cooker will just change your life. It makes food preparation so quick and easy.
Doctor, so you're saying some of these foods that are toxic, we can detoxify with a pressure cooker.
Right.
So then they would be relatively safe to eat.
Exactly.
Wow. How does a lectin, let's just look at it from the physiology of food. So how does a lectin get into your stomach and affect the white blood cells? I know you were saying that there's some autoimmune disease. How does that do that?
So one of lectin's methods is the lining of your intestines is only one cell thick. And the surface area of your intestines is the same surface area as a tennis court. That's a lot of surface area in you. And the cells that line our gut are called enterocytes, and they're all held together, locked arm in arm, like the game we played Red Rover, when we were kids.
Sure.
And these locked arm and arms are called tight junctions. So lectins bind to enterocytes, and they actually flip a switch, and they make a compound called zonulin, and there's not going to be a test. And so
I'm writing it down.
Yeah. So zonulin actually breaks this tight junction. So the arms come apart, they're locking these cells together, and then lectins go through the wall of your gut. And on the other side of the wall is your immune system, and let's call them our border patrol. So the border patrol says, oh my gosh, the illegal aliens have run across the border and we're under attack, and let's go to threat level 5. Let's mobilize the troops. Let's not only attack the border where they're coming across, but let's look what these guys look like and remember what they look like. And wherever we see them, we'll scramble the fighter jets. And if we see them elsewhere in the body, we'll attack, and we'll ask questions later. Now, plants are so brilliant and have had 400 million years to work on this, that these proteins, lectin molecules, look a lot like other proteins in our body. And it's called molecular mimicry. And Lauren Cordain, I think, first coined this phrase years ago, the author of the original paleo diet. And what they do is they look very, very similar to other proteins in our body, for instance, like the synovial sheath, like the myelin sheath, like nerve cells. And our immune system attacks them in basically a case of mistaken identity, almost friendly fire. And what I've seen now through the last 10 years of working with autoimmune disease patients is that if we take lectins out of their diet and heal the wall of their gut, that their autoimmune disease will go away. And in fact, just this week on Amazon, one of the reviews was from a woman who had very, very high levels of the marker for lupus, which is anti-nuclear antibody, and tried everything. And she went on the plant paradox, and within a matter of months, her antibodies were virtually undetectable. And she said, this has been going on for 10 years, and this is the only.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Dr. Gundry, if you do this, let's say you are suffering from one of these autoimmune diseases, and it is caused by the lectins. If you start to pressure cook the lectins, or you pull them out of your diet completely, how quickly would you expect to see somebody start to turn around?
So we usually see, and we do markers of autoimmune disease in all of our patients. And about half of my practice is now autoimmune disease. And we see usually resolution of everything in 3 to 6 months. Everybody's a little bit different, but we've seen some remarkable regression in MS, for example. Crohn's.
No kidding. Wow.
Crohn's and ulcerative colitis is actually one of the easier things to fix, despite the fact that you see every other commercial on TV seems to be for Crohn's or ulcerative colitis drugs.
Right.
So everybody's different.
Do you see fibromyalgia? Just because I've been seeing a rash of it in our office. I was wondering.
Yeah, fibromyalgia is the same process. And
it is. Wow.
And it'll go away. In fact, this truck driver had fibromyalgia, and he doesn't have it anymore. It's gone. It was so crippling to him that he actually had to have his wife, handle the trailer hitch and coupling up because it was too painful for him to move. And now he says, I'm like a kid.
Unbelievable. No wonder he wanted to give you a hug. I'd give you a hug. My God. What that you spoke about gluten. Why is so much attention on gluten as a lectin when it's not on these other things?
Well, so gluten is just one lectin, and it's actually not very important in the scheme of lectins. I think we've been distracted by gluten. There are cultures that thrive on gluten. For instance, Indonesia uses one of their major proteins is seitan or seitan, which is pure vital wheat gluten. And they don't, get celiac and digestive issues. But one of the things that's happened to us is that the whole part of the grain, the hull, has most of the major lectins. And one of the things that's happened to our poor health is the idea that we should be eating whole grain goodness. And as I talk about in the book, it's interesting, the vast majority of cultures who eat grains go to the trouble of taking the hull off of grain. In fact, there are 4 billion people who use rice as their staple, and yet 4 billion people eat white rice and take the hull off of brown rice. And surely 4 billion people can't be that stupid. They do it because the hull has the major lectins and the white rice has far less.
I got to tell you, my wife and I, we were just eating Chinese food, if you would, and she always gets the brown rice because she's always been under the impression that it is healthier. Now, I did several shows on glyphosate and how they spray a lot of the wheat and stuff with it and how it's absorbed in the hulls, but I hadn't heard it from this perspective.
And that's since you brought up glyphosate, we know now that glyphosate changes our bacterial genome and our microbiome, but it makes gluten actually more antigenic than normal. And so that one of the things that seems to be part of this gluten intolerance is that glyphosate is sprayed on conventional wheat, conventional oats, conventional soybeans, conventional corn as a drying agent to make harvesting easier.
Right.
And so it's on everything. And we don't wash it off. And so it becomes incorporated into all the foods we eat, like our corn chips, for instance, or our soybean oil. And it also is fed to animals because the animals are fed corn and soybeans. And so we now know we can find it in animal meat. And so we, when we eat factory farmed food, beef or pork or chicken, we're actually eating glyphosate as part of that, not to mention the antibiotics that they're given.
Unbelievable. I interviewed a Dr. Seneff from MIT, and she spoke about the glyphosate and that it's at such a level that she predicts, and it is associated with autism, that she predicts that 90% of all male children will be born with autism into the years like 2033, 32, something like that. Are you finding some of that to be the case as well?
Yeah, the really scary thing about it, it's now become ubiquitous in the United States. In fact, we now know that most wine in the United States is loaded with glyphosate because the weeds between the vineyards have been sprayed with Roundup. And so it's in our wine, and it's even in some organic wines because the fields next door have been sprayed.
Wow.
And
Unbelievable.
Yeah, I was just doing a podcast in German yesterday. My book is coming out in German in a few weeks. In fact, the book, The Plant Paradox, has been so popular that it's being, so far, it's being translated into 26 languages, including Estonian. I didn't know you could.
Estonian, wow. Wow.
So anyhow, he told me.
Is that how you know you made it? When you go into Estonian, you have made it, Dr. Gundry.
I guess that's what it is. Vietnamese, Estonian. Anyhow, so he was telling me that the EU Parliament just passed a law this week legalizing glyphosate in Europe. And I think that's the beginning of the end. One of the things that I think has kept Europeans healthier than us is that they've resisted Roundup. But Bayer, which controls Roundup in Europe because of a Monsanto deal, is a huge player in politics, just like Monsanto is in the United States. And so they have gotten it through. And he was as scared as I was when he mentioned that.
Unbelievable. There's a segment of the population that, like yourself, that they're going in the right direction, and it seems like a lot of the general population are not privy to this knowledge. So thank you so much for putting the book, The Plant Paradox, out, sir. Just how would people that want to know more about the book, know more about you, how would they, as we wind down, how would they get in touch with you?
So they can go to gundrymd.com, or they can go to drgundry.com. They can find the book on Amazon, barnesandnoble.com, or, please go to your local bookstore. I can guarantee you it'll be there. It was on the New York Times bestseller list for 13 weeks, and it was on the Amazon top 100 books for 7 months. So it's been a popular book, so I guarantee you your bookstore will have it. And if they don't, make them get it.
Absolutely. This is a very, very important book. And it's really like the two books are just life-changing. I mean, one final question. Has anybody else recognized this? I mean, this is the first, again, with the lectins. Are you the first person to actually recognize the significance of this? Has there been anybody else?
No, lectins have been known about since 1880. And interestingly enough, Dr. D'Amato of the Eat Right for Your Type and the blood type diet.
Yes.
It was actually a lectin avoidance diet, but it was cleverly made into a blood type diet. And I don't, he did very well with that book. But if you actually dig deeper, it's a lectin book. I know, for instance, Dr. Joseph Mercola now has become a big fan of avoiding lectins. In fact, he has a cookbook coming out in a couple of weeks, and he stopped the presses on his cookbook and took lectins out of his cookbook, which
wow, that says a lot right there.
Oh, and by the way, the Plant Paradox cookbook will be out in April of this coming year. We just put it to bed this week, and there's over 100 new recipes, a lot of them done by James Beard award-winning chefs. So this cookbook, we want to make this lifestyle accessible to the average person, the truck drivers of the world,
right,
who don't necessarily have access to whole foods, but they want their comfort foods. Believe it or not, we got waffles and all sorts of fun stuff.
Dr. Gundry, you are a busy man. Thank you, sir, for your work. It is greatly appreciated, and thank you for being on our show.
Well, thank you for having me. Hope to talk to you again soon, Dan.
I would look forward to it.
This episode is sponsored by New Jersey Foot and Ankle Center in Oradell, New Jersey. Remember, when you have a foot problem, you've got a foot doctor in the family. Weekend and evening appointments are available. Call us at 201-261-9445. Once again, that's 201-261-9445. Thanks for listening. Check out the show notes over at drdanspeaks.com. If you're loving the show, head over to iTunes and leave us a review, and we'll catch you next time.